contract to deliver pies to Greenwich Hospital, and his name was John Wayne Glover.
The detective contacted Glover and arranged to speak to him the next day. But it was an appointment Glover would never keep.
When he hadn't showed up by 6 p.m, I phoned his home again, wondering why he hadn't shown up. His wife answered the phone and explained that right at that moment she was leaving for the hospital because he'd just attempted to commit suicide. He'd left a suicide note, and I remember very much the words "no more grannies" on it. It was a significant thing for me to do as a junior detective, to go in and talk to him by myself and get a photograph, knowing that if I didn't get it, all was lost.
This was a tremendous breakthrough for the task force, because we now had, not only did we have the sketch drawing of the 50-year-old male grey-haired suspect who had committed a lot of assaults, we now had a Polaroid photograph of another suspect who had come to light just recently. Our feeling was that we were on the way. We were on the way.
As John Glover was placed under surveillance, his background was being checked. And not surprisingly, apart from his age, it matched the forensic profile perfectly, starting with a criminal record in his 20s.
There was one there where there was some assault on a woman. There was one there of offence of peep and pry. He had in fact had some period of time in the army, in another country. We found out that he was a company representative and he had a company car. We found out that he normally worked of a morning and he was normally finished by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So he has the availability of time. The other thing we learned about him was that he was linked to the crime scenes by employment.
As a pie salesman, John Glover's job took him to Belrose, Lane Cove and back to his home in Mosman.
It doesn't prima facie mean that he's the killer at that point of time, but it certainly gives us that sense of encouragement and direction.
The pieces of the puzzle were falling together, but the detectives needed more before they could make an arrest.
What we wanted was evidence, and what we were going to do was allow him to select a victim, if he did. We would then obtain evidence of him stalking the victim, of being a predator, and we would allow him to get within probably metres of a victim, and then we would prevent the crime. There were times when he would stop his vehicle and get out of the car and go for a walk, and that became something of interest as to what he was up to. But then he wouldn't do anything. He'd simply get back in his car and off he'd go again.
But the detectives didn't give up on Glover or the investigation. They were now targeting nursing homes and unreported sexual assaults, wondering if Glover, the pie salesman, might have dropped by.
The secretary was actually looking quite knowledgeable, and she said, well, yeah, we're talking about 4 and 20 pies. And as soon as she said that, I felt really quite good about it, because yes, it was 4 and 20 pies that this man was, John Glover was representing. And she then said, would you be looking for John Glover? And I thought, oh, this is just amazing. Like, she, not only does she know about, she actually knows his name, so that's a really positive identification. I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, we are looking at someone called John Glover. And then she just looked me square in the eye and said, that's my husband. And I was just incredulous. I said, will you tell John that I'm here today? She said, oh, no, I won't, because he was so upset last time he tried to commit suicide. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. We all knew straight away the impact that this was going to have on our investigation. The risk was that he would speak to his solicitor and confront the police and say, put up or shut up. Or he would go undercover, or him being such a wild character, who's to say he wouldn't have gone off and attacked another woman.
John Wayne Glover was the prime suspect for the murder of 5 women. He was under his 5th week of surveillance when a detective visited a local nursing home.
I went into my spiel, which was along the lines that I'm making a number of inquiries in relation to sexual assaults on the northern suburbs, and I was wondering if they'd had anyone approach them that was offering to sell meat pies to distribute through their kitchens.
Without realising, the woman she was speaking to was Glover's wife.
It's probably 1 in a million chance that this would happen, but it happened. And you have to deal with it. I mean, it's one of those things, you can't run away from it, you have to deal with it. The following Monday morning, surveillance are still carrying out their normal surveillance duties that have been going on for several weeks. And John Glover actually leaves home at the normal time. He gets into the company car and he heads off.
He rung his employer and said, "I'm not coming into work today, I'm going to see my solicitor." So we thought, that's it, game's up. He went to a bottle shop and bought a bottle of whiskey, which we all thought was very odd, but still. He had a case with him, and we thought, well, that's to go and see his solicitor with.
He went to an address at Mosman, parked his car out the front, got out of the car, had his briefcase, walked inside premises, knocked on the front door, the door was opened, he was welcomed, he went inside. The surveillance police were sitting down the road, they saw this, they were quite happy that it seemed to be a legitimate visit.
But the hours ticked by, and John Glover didn't come out. By late afternoon, the police were beginning to worry.
Fortunately, there was a dog that was barking, quite loud, near the premises. And so we decided to send the local uniform patrol in to check out this complaint about this dog barking. They went to the premises and they knocked on the front door and there was no answer. And the place seemed to be in darkness. So they became quite concerned, and so they reported that back and said, well, there's something amiss in the premises.
Task Force detectives rushed to the scene. What they found inside, no one was prepared for.
And inside the premises they found the body of a 60-year-old female lying in the hallway.
It was certainly a low point in our career, and something we still think about often. I recall seeing the bloodstained hammer on the lounge room floor, on the carpeted floor, surrounded by what appeared to be blood.
The situation they faced then was, where was this John Glover?
I recall in the bedroom seeing a pair of men's trousers draped over the end of the bed. We then got to the bathroom and I saw the feet of John Glover sticking out of the bath. His mouth was barely above the waterline. He appeared to be unconscious and breathing very heavily. We saw a bottle of scotch, empty, with a paper bag, a number of vials of drugs, empty, on the vanity, as well as pill bottles.
Good evening. Tonight, a possible breakthrough in the year-long investigation into Sydney's granny killings. Detectives this afternoon charged a 58-year-old man with the murder of an elderly woman at Mosman.
In the bathroom, police found a 58-year-old man unconscious, immersed in a tub of water. He was revived by ambulance paramedics and taken to the Royal North Shore Hospital.
Police now knew they had the killer of 6 elderly women, but they needed to prove it.
We knew we had a job ahead of us. Although there was a feeling of satisfaction that this man was in custody, we lacked forensic evidence that could connect him to any of the other crimes.
The following morning, a search was conducted of Glover's car and home. Amongst the belongings, a pair of shoes, the soles of which were compatible to the print found on the carpet of his 5th victim's house. But they needed a confession.
We certainly hoped that Glover would talk to us. And that following morning he was sitting up in bed, and I recall speaking to him just in a general sense about non-issues, his family and so forth. And then at one point he came out with, you probably noticed the photographs in the paper of the women. They all bear a striking resemblance to my mother-in-law Essie. And that was significant to us because she featured in his suicide note from January, At that point, we believed that this man was taking responsibility, albeit in a brief way, for the murders of these elderly women on the North Shore. He also spoke in this conversation of using a hammer he had at home, taking that hammer with him and leaving the car, placing the hammer down the front of his trousers, and then using the hammer to attack women from behind. After these murders, he would take that hammer home and use hydrochloric acid, which he kept in the backyard of his premises, to clean all traces of blood and other evidence from it. He was at pains during the course of his interviews to say that there was no sexual component to any of these murders, where Glover used pantyhose to strangle these women. He said he did so in order to make sure that they were dead. What amazed us all during the course of those interviews was the way in which Glover described committing these crimes. They were in such a matter-of-fact, everyday way that he spoke about these brutal slayings that it was extraordinary. It was like he was talking about making breakfast. In fact, during the course of each of the interviews, Glover clearly articulated that he would go to the club and drink beer with the money he'd just robbed from the victims.
After leaving hospital, Glover showed police where he disposed of the belongings of some of his victims. Like his killing field, the spot was not too far from his home.
2 Sydney psychiatrists have given evidence in the Supreme Court, diagnosing so-called granny killer John Glover as mentally ill. The defence is arguing that Glover is not guilty on 6 charges of murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
In an interview, the 58-year-old salesman had explained, "It's as if John Glover, the good guy, was watching John Glover, the bad guy. I felt powerless to stop it."
I asked him how he explained it. He said, well, the bad John Glover would come out and do the act, and then the good John Glover would then take over, which was very easily dealt with by saying, well, at what point did the good John Glover come out? Was it before you washed the hammer or afterwards? You see, it was very clumsy.
The jury rejected Glover's insanity plea. They found him guilty on all charges. Justice James Woods described Glover as a dangerous man who, if released back into the community, would almost certainly gratify his desire to kill.
Glover was given the maximum sentence for each offence. His file was marked, never to be released.
John Glover knew exactly what he was doing, that he intended to do what he did. He was cunning in how he did it, and I think that I would put him in the category of simply being bad, not mad.
John Wayne Glover had attempted to kill himself while on the outside and again behind bars. 15 years after he was found guilty, he was finally successful.
Sydney serial killer John Wayne Glover has died in prison. The man known as the Granny Killer was found dead today in a shower block at Lithgow Jail. He'd hanged himself. 72-year-old Glover was jailed in 1991 for the murders of 6 elderly women on the North Shore.
No family members attended Glover's funeral. He was buried as he lived, with his demons and secrets.
There are other crimes in Australia that have similarities to the crimes committed by John Glover. I still believe that there are certain aspects